Hi everyone, my name is Stephanie. I'm going to be introducing Chapter 5, the Anthropological Approach of Personality Studies. I apologize in advance. I am going to be looking down on my computer screen to go over the outline that I made. So, the introduction of this chapter. So, what is anthropological study? It is the study of personality that centers around the relationship between culture and personality. Anthropology is like a broad field, so it's the study of man or humans. It includes many subfields such as physical anthropology, archaeology, cultural anthropology, linguistics. The most relevant field though is cultural anthropology, which it also has its own subfields, which is ethnology, ethnography, and culture and personality. The research is mainly focused on culture and personality because culture is a great impact on early socialization and adult personality. So I'm going to start off with how the culture and personality studies, which is designed by Robert Levine. He classifies the basic theoretical position on the relation of culture and personality in 5 categories. 1 is anti-cultural personality position. 2 is the reductionist position. Now, before I move on, the 1 and 2 categories, they're not really discussed that much. So the third one is the personality is culture view, or the configurational approach. 4 is the personality mediation view, and 5 is the two systems view. So I guess you can say broader and simpler approaches to culture and personality were also attempted by culture as the determinant of personality, culture as a determinant and expression of personality, and culture and personality as coexisting systems in society. Okay, so let's start off with the configurational approach, which is personality is culture. First, we're going to review Benedict's patterns of culture. So this was pioneered by Ruth Benedict. She analyzed distinctive cultural patterns from 3 different groups of people in relations to their basic personality. The first group was the Pueblo Indians of New Mexico, the Zuni. They were ceremonious people who value sobriety and are inoffensive above all other virtues. Their central theme is Apollonian. I'll go into further depth what that is. The second group is Dobu Islanders in Melanesia. They are noted for their dangerousness. They are said to be magicians who have diabolic power and warriors who halt at no treasury. Their central theme is Dionysian. Again, I'll go over that in a little bit. Third group, the Kwajalein Indians of the northwest coast of North America, Vancouver Island. Its members were given the seats of highest honor at the winter dances, and all others must hold back from the feast until the cannibals had begun to eat. Yes, cannibalism. So in referring back to what Apollonian and Dionysian are as central themes, so according to Benedict, Apollonian is a mild in a way to avoid extremes. Dionysian is an aggressive way of seeking excess and desiring the elimination of frenzy, also labeled as paranoid and megalomaniac in psychopathological terms. So let's see. Then we go on to Mead South Sea studies. It was pioneered by Margaret Mead. Mead studies focused on specific research problems or topics such as 1, problems of the adolescent girl, 2, education of the pre-adolescent girl, 3, sex differences and temperament among adults. All 3 studies were designed under a common research theme, the cultural basis of group differences in behavior. So Margaret Mead's writings consisted of 1, coming of age in Samoa. So the central question here was, are the disturbances which vex our adolescents due to the nature of adolescence itself or to civilization? Her studies of behavior patterns were from 50 adolescent girls in Samoa. Her conclusion here was Samoan adults did not experience tensions, conflict, rebellion, or storm and stress that are usually experienced by American adolescents. And her second writing, Growing Up in New Guinea, An interesting finding that the children among the menace of the Admiralty Islands were strictly naturalistic and did not develop animistic concepts. So they didn't personify images such as like animals and things like spirits, rocks, trees, winds, etc. Her third writing was Sex and Temperament in Three Primitive Societies. The purpose of this was to discover to what degree temperamental differences between the sexes were intimate and to what extent they were culturally determined, and furthermore to inquire minutely into the educational mechanisms connected with these differences. The studies and results of three tribes in northwestern part of New Guinea were the Arapesh, which are men and women are trained to be cooperative, unaggressive, responsive to the needs and demands of others. Mundugamor, men and women are developed as ruthless, aggressive, positively sexed individuals with the maternal, cherishing aspects of personality at a minimum. The Tashambuli, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that. A genuine reversal of sex attitudes of our own culture. So this one was really interesting. So the example it provided was like, so our usual cultural norms are male being dominant. So here in the Tashambuli, it's the opposite. So women are dominant and personal, managing partner, the man, the less responsible and emotionally dependent person, which I find fascinating. I mean, I would love to live in a society where women dominate men. That would be really cool. So now we go on to Robert Levine's fourth approach, which was the personality mediation view. In this approach, personality is viewed as the intervening variable between the cultural causes, primary institutions, and the cultural effects, secondary institutions. Changes in primary institutions, such as family, would affect changes in basic personality, and this in turn invites changes in secondary institutions, such as morals. I'll go into more further depth in this. That's the intro. So we're starting off with Gardner's basic personality structure. So basic personality or modal personality is the effective adaptive tools of the individual, which are common to every individual in society. Its common characteristics are acquired by members of society primarily through common formative experiences in childhood. An example would be culture-specific techniques of nursing, weaning, toilet training, and disciplining sexual and other behavior. Sexual personality is formed through primary institutions. Now, primary institutions is family organizations and group formation, basic disciplines, feeding, weaning, institutionalized care or neglect of children, and training and sexual taboos including aim, object or both, substance, techniques, etc. And secondary institutions are cultural effects, religious beliefs, or worldviews. Now we go into Whiting's child training and personality, which was explored by John Beatrice Whiting and Irvine Child. They created a revised model of the personality mediation approach. Their major variables are more specified for rigorous empirical testing, so ecological, socioeconomic, political factors, or maintenance systems. The method for testing their model was an extensive utilization of vast cultural data. So their methods for testing, they use the human area relation files, vast cultural data for comparative analysis, and their hypotheses was children brought up by mothers who make a substantial contribution to the subsistence of the family will be more concerned with the welfare of others than children brought up by mothers who do not make such a contribution. Now, there are two sets of judges needed to test the theory across cultures. One set reads the ethnographies of a sample of societies distributed around the world and rates the mother's reported contribution to the subsistence economy. The other set reads the same sources and rates the children on their tendency to help others and take responsibility for the welfare of others. So this field study can identify a sample of women, estimate their contribution to subsistence, and record the rate of helpful and responsible behavior observed in their children. Some of Whiting Associates' significant findings include 1. Child training practices and their immediate effect on the child, satisfaction or anxiety, were integrated with particular explanations of illness and therapy. 2, compared with 75 samples of societies around the world, the American sample, Midwestern, urban, white, middle-class families, started the child training practices exceptionally early. So especially weaning and toilet training, and quite severe in the general socialization of their children. Third is training of aggression wasn't a universal problem, and the parents in most cultures were more concerned about interpersonal relations than with the body functions, such as toilet training. Next, we move on to Ronald P. Romer in Illuminating Studies on Parental Acceptance Rejection. So he suggested parental warmth was acceptance rejection. 2 is control, which is permissive strictness. And some examples would be, so children rejected or neglected by parents tend to experience a higher degree of anxiety, dependence, and aggression versus children who are accepted by their parents. And rejected children as they grow up would develop a negative view of the world and would even reject their own children later. So that concludes the 4th approach. Now going into the 5th one, which is the 2 systems view of Robert Levine. So the 2 systems view approach views culture and personality as 2 different systems: social, cultural institutions, and modal personality structure. So these systems are functionally interdependent. As Levine quoted, is both sets of requirements make demands of individual behavior, the personality system for satisfaction of psychological needs, the social cultural system for socially valued performance in the roles that are institutionalized in the social structure. So moving on to Inkel's and Levinson's study on modal personality and social change. Inkel's and Levinson argue that most descriptions of group personality are not directly derived from the study of the personality traits of adults, but inferred from the patterns of child rearing practices, cultural themes, or social structure. Modal personality structure or national character refers to the mode or modes of the distribution of personality variants within a given society. Adult personality requires their personal personality assessment, which is determined by 2 basic questions. One being, what is the role model? What is the role of modal personality trends in establishing, maintaining, and changing collective behavior ideological structures? 2 is, what is the role of social cultural forces in producing and changing modal personality? And analyzing the 2 systems, personality and social structure, 4 ideal types of relationship between modal personality and social cultural system were suggested. One was ideal congruence, which is the type of relationship in which a high degree of compatibility between personality needs and social role demands prevails. So an example of this would be people are congruent to the extent that the individual can utilize the available opportunities with adequate gratification and can accept societal demands with minimal pain and anxiety. Now, the second one is unstable congruence, and this happens when a seemingly stable relationship between modal personality and social cultural system precipitates a high potential for abrupt social change or generates widespread personality deviance. An example of this is individuals tend to experience severe strains which would threaten personality integration or impel them to engage in a direct social action toward explosive social change. The third one is institutionally induced congruence. It's characterized by a situation where there arise institutional changes so marked that the society is relatively well established and internally stable modal personality types experience serious strain in meeting the new role demands made on them, quoted by Inkel's and Levinson. Their fourth is characterological induced congruence, which is the hypothetical situation in which, again quoting Inkel's and Levinson, is a fully elaborated and relatively stable modal personality type is introduced into an already established institutional order with which it is not compatible. So an example of this is replacement of the entire population in a given society with another population with a different model personality structure who would perform the same social functions as the previous population. This may also be applied to ecological and occupational mobility within a given society. So Ingalls and Smith have also made a contribution toward the empirical study of psychological factors in the process of modernization. Modernization is a social process of development which involves changes in both person and environment, neglecting the person. So this created by Ingalls and Smith, a Harvard-Stanford project on social and cultural aspects of modernization in 1963. Their test subjects were 6,000 men from Argentina, Chile, India, Israel, Nigeria, and East Pakistan, Bangladesh. Their interview schedules were based on two things. It was OM, which is the overall measure of modernity, and two, the IM, international modernity. Both included subgroups for comparative analysis of individual modernity. So it was rural migrants newly arrived in the city, urban workers earning their living outside large-scale enterprises, and urban workers in major industry. Their study revealed massive evidence of a common psychosocial syndrome of individual modernity across cultures in the process of modernization. So the national differences in individual modernity is, so Israeli and Argentinian samples were the most modern, Bangladesh sample the least modern, and Chilean, Nigerian, and Indian samples are representing an intermediate position. Unfortunately, there is no answer to what causes these differences in Ingalls and Smith's study. Moving on to the topic of comparative study of values in complex societies. So these are a set of studies done. So for one, it was Clucone and Strodbeck's value orientation study. So they had 5 universal human problems, which were formed in the form of questions to be addressed. So one was, what is the character of innate human nature or human nature orientation? 2 is, what is the relation of man to nature and supernature? That would be quoted man-nature orientation. 3rd is, what is the temporal focus of human life, which is time orientation? What is the modality of human activity, which is labeled as activity orientation? And the 5th question is, what is the modality of a man's relationship to other men? That would be relational orientation. Thus, this value orientation study conducted sample surveys in 5 communities: Spanish American, Texans, Mormons, Navajo, and Zuni. Their study of value orientation has become a great significance in cross-cultural study of personality. Their major contribution was the formulation of a comprehensive typology of variations and value orientations, the development of rigorous empirical method of testing their typology, and 3 would be the employment of an extensive cross-cultural survey of contemporary peoples in the United States. Moving on to Hughes. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce his name or his last name, but I'm going to say Hughes or Sue's American and Chinese passage to differences. So this was a cross-cultural study of value orientations in complex society done by Francis L.K. Hugh or Sue. He did the comparative studies on Chinese and Americans. His method of data collection and analysis consisted of a strong emphasis on the anthropologist's systematic understanding of her own culture as a prerequisite to work in psychological anthropology, a reference on in-depth fieldwork among 2 or more societies for comparative purposes, The major research interests in culturally influenced psychological and behavioral characteristics of contemporary peoples and large complex societies, such as China, India, United States, and Japan. And critical view of Western scholars, assuming the universal validity of their findings. His study was based on the assumption that the American and Chinese had a distinctively different way of life. To test his hypotheses, Hugh examined every aspect of American and Chinese cultural values, social institutions, behavior patterns such as art, literature, marriage, family, government, religion, economic life, etc. So he found that Americans were individual-centered, which an example is the typical American family emphasized independence of its individual members. Thus, everyone becomes individual-centered, self-reliant, competitive, fragmented, and transitory in interpersonal relations. American social problems were racism, ageism, crimes, drugs, and violence, and their American strength was material security. Now, for Chinese, they were situation-centered. An example of this is, so the Chinese family stresses mutual dependence, thus everyone becomes integral part of the primary group, which is family and kin, and situation-centered, such as interdependent, cooperative, stable, and harmonious in one's relations with people, things, and gods. Their Chinese weakness was underdevelopment of science, lack of voluntary non-kingship organizations, the ills of government, and their strength was psychological security. Hughes also identified a concept called Gen, and Gen is made of 7 centric circles. However, 6 and 7 were never explained. So layer 5 was labeled as unexpressed consciousness. Layer 4 was expressible conscious. Layer 3 is intimate society and culture. Layer 2 was operative society and culture. Layer 1 was a wider society and culture. Layer 0 was outer world. Now, the concept of Gen compromises to layers 3 and 4 because this area is the central substance of man as a social and cultural being. Next, we move on to Connor's study on 3 generations of Japanese Americans. So this study was done by John W. Connor. He conducted the most intriguing research in psychological anthropology. His empirical study of persistence and change in personality characteristics among 3 generations of Japanese Americans. His study consisted of acculturation patterns of Japanese Americans over generations. It dealt with the enduring theme of modal personality or national character. These issues were examined by a large-scale sample survey. So his sample included 234 Issei, the first generation, 241 Nisei, the second generation, and 372 Sensei, the third generation, as well as 154 Caucasians. In addition to interviewing this sample, there were 2 questionnaires, such as ethnic identity and contrasting value survey. So the Japanese characteristics coded hierarchy, collectivity, duty and obligation, difference and dependence. American characteristics coded equality, individualism, rights, privileges, self-assertion, self-reliance. And the findings from Connor's study were as follows. So for one, the retention of Japanese characteristics among the first generation, which are the Issei, is high with emphasis on deference, duty and obligation, hierarchy, and collectivity, especially the family. 2 is the second generation, the Nisei or Nisei. Characteristics fall between the Isseis and the Senseis, which are the Senseis are the third generation. The Nisei are more deferent, more abrasive, have a greater need for order, endurance, and achievement, are more authoritarian, place great emphasis on emotionally in the family bond, and are more predisposed to the hierarchical terms. And three, the third generation characteristic, the sensei, are closer to the Caucasians than their parents or grandparents, particularly in terms of